Welcome to the IpX True North Podcast, where we connect people, processes, and tools. This is episode 14, Beyond Engineering, the role of everyone in configuration management, with Ray Wozny, CEO of IpX, and Brandy Taylor, Vice President of Services at IpX.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Brandy Taylor, and I am the Vice President of Services for IpX, which is the Institute for Process Excellence. And I am super pumped to be hanging out with the CEO of the Institute for Process Excellence today. So that's Mr. Ray Wozny. So good morning, Ray. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Brandy. How are you?
Doing great. Good. Doing great. Thanks for joining me today. So today, I think we're going to talk about something that we have in common. So it's definitely one of our favorite topics. Can you guess?
Configuration management?
Yay! Change and configuration management. So
amazing.
You're so good. You're just right in tune with me. So the specific topic of the podcast today is everyone is CM, and that's, change and configuration management. So, when I want to get a general idea of what the world thinks of something, I use the Google, as my mother would say. And so when I Google configuration management, let me read to you, what omniscient Google tells us, and it is a bit long. So configuration management is a systems engineering process for establishing and maintaining consistency of a product's performance, functional, and physical attributes with its requirements, design, and operational information throughout its life. So that's a very long statement. So in your words, how would you communicate that out to the world through Google?
So that statement in itself is true, right? It's the traditional way we looked at configuration management going back decades, and it was focused, right? It was focused on the documentation around my product, right? And that's what configuration management was purely focused on. And so when people ask us, what is configuration management? It depends who you talk to. If you talk to people who have only been exposed to the traditional way of doing configuration management, that's what they're going to tell you. Hey, I have to manage all of the data around my product, right? All of that. And as we're going to discuss today, we take a different perspective on that. And we say, no, configuration management is really across the entire enterprise, right? So it's more than just my product. Yes, my product configuration management is critical to the success of my organization. But there's a lot more, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. Is what is that lot more stuff that goes on and stuff like that. But yeah, typically, imagine if you were to go to a gathering with some friends somewhere, and somebody asked you, "So what do you work in?" And you said, "Well, I work in configuration management." And they said, "What's that?" If you read that sentence to them from Google, they would probably, by the time you got to the last part of the sentence, you'd look up and they'd be gone.
That's right. They would. Right? I have this problem today. I have a hard time communicating for people to understand what this means.
Right. And so that's the other part of it is we need to try to, as we're trying to get the folks within organizations to understand that it's enterprise wide, we also have to do if you want to call it as a function or as a career, those of us who are involved in configuration management, we have to be able to explain what does this really mean in layman's terms, so that they can look at it and go, oh yeah, of course, that is me, right? Part of what I do is that. So that's where we have to get to, right? Instead of reading this big long thing about systems engineering, which is all critical and it's all true, as I mentioned, but it's much more than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, many organizations, many of the ones that we even work with, they still think of change and configuration management as an engineering service per se. I think they think of it as a process to just manage and release their drawings and their associated, bills of material. So, and I know, and of course that's true, but I think what we're learning and what other people are learning is that's a bit of a closed-minded perspective. I think, many people still have this perspective. And I think they even view their PLM tool specifically as an engineering release tool sometimes. And I just think it's such a shame, because modern PLM tools are so much more powerful than what these companies are using them for.
Yeah. And if you look at that, right? So historically, if you go back, configuration management was normally a department within the engineering world of a company. And so what would happen is that within that, yes, there was a lot of, if you think back into the 70s, 80s, there was a lot of paper, right? Drawings were still done on drafting boards, right? We had tech pubs, illustrators and stuff creating specs and everything. So you needed somebody to process all of that information and get it into my repositories. And so we created these roles called configuration and management. And of course, they needed a mechanism. So they said, oh, change management, right? So you guys take care of all this paperwork that we're creating and make sure it goes to the right places. Well, what happened after a while, we realized that, the paperwork that we were processing and everything, and by the time it got to my suppliers, it wasn't right. Right. So then the role started to change a little bit from a configuration management. Let's try to make sure we're working up front more closely with the engineers to ensure that they're creating a product hierarchy that's going to actually work in our ERP system. Right. So it started to become a little bit more cross-functional at that time. And so, and if you move forward to where we are in the world today, right, where everything is, you got model-based, the definition talks about systems engineering, right? We got model-based systems engineering, model-based design, model-based, enterprises. All of these definitions that are coming, they're still dealing with data, right? And so what's happened over the years, the role of configuration management has expanded because now I'm dealing with data in these advanced technology systems and stuff. And so I have to have the skills to be able to do that. We have to understand from a model-based perspective, how do I create a structure for a product? We also have to understand that when I'm creating information in my system and it's got to get to my supplier or my second or third tier supplier, there's a lot of processes that take place to make that happen. And so the role of configuration management, particularly per IpX, has truly changed. Right, it's gone from this document-centric, right, system to what we call a data-centric, right? Because we're trying to get to this concept called the digital thread, right? And to get to the digital thread, it's knowing the data about my product from its initial creation till the end of life. And so configuration management plays a key role. And we're starting to see that the role of configuration management is actually becoming more elevated. Right, where it used to be a subset, a department within engineering somewhere, now it's actually in many organizations, it's at that same level, right? Because I can create the data, but if I can't get it released properly and under the right change control and the right quality checks, it doesn't matter, right? And so it's getting to that same level in many organizations, which is great to see for those of us who have been in it for many years. That role is getting the center attention, and really that's what it is that it's been trying to work for all these years.
Yeah, I agree. So many great things that you said right there. So, I mean, a really great change management process really should be seen as the way to connect all that data, right? Because it really does need to be connected. And I think, we call that end-to-end, right? The end-to-end enterprise business process. So that's that full product life cycle like you're talking about. It starts all the way at the very beginning at that ideation stage, and it goes all the way through to service and even decommission. So, I think if an organization is dedicated to creating a really great and robust change process for the product they sell, why would they not think about using that same process for managing change in all domains of their organization, across that full value stream? So that's how you can create that true visibility of all the work accomplished and yet understand all the work yet to be done, because you have that connected data there. So, I think if with all functions engaged and integrated, you really begin to understand the full change impact and the traceability. And that is how you begin to really create that foundation for a robust digital thread like you're talking about.
Right. And if you look at it even from that tool perspective, right, back in the day, there were master file centers, right? Flat files, right? Things were printed out, copies were made. And then we went into this world of PDM, right? Where we said, well, gee, we can automate this check in, check out functions and stuff like that. So eventually it became PLM, right? Lifecycle management. But ultimately, even if I have the tool, right, and I understand hopefully the capabilities of the tool, you still have to have the processes underneath that to make sure that I'm doing the right things within the tool, right? Because as you know, we have a saying that you can automate bad data and bad workflows and just do bad things faster, right? And so that's not the goal. And so stepping back and understanding, hey, if I'm going to look at the processes for managing change, as you stated, isn't every organization in my company processing changes? Of course they are, right? I mean, you've got HR, if I'm going to hire somebody, that's a change request to the organization, right? So there should be a workflow. Now, whether I manage that in my PLM tool, whether I have an HR tool that's going to be managed and stuff like that, but ultimately, right, there's a change process that we need to recognize that the steps should be followed, right? I want to hire somebody. That's a request to the organization. We have to do a technical analysis. What skills am I looking for? What kind of experience, right? We have to do a business case review, right? We have to say, well, this person's going to cost us this much. And then I don't just go get to hire that person. I have to take it to somebody to review it. So what we call a change review board. So they're going to look at it and say, okay, we agree. Yep, go and make this change. And just like in the real world, guess what? Am I done? No. I'm just starting. Now I have an approved change. I have to go make that change happen. So whether it's my product or hiring a new employee, right, there's what we call an implementation that has to take place, a plan. And so we've got to, I've got to make the offer, go through any negotiations, set a date. Then internally, what do I have to do? I have to make sure I've got a workspace for that person if they're coming on site, that they've got the right tools, the right access to the systems, passwords, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the implementation planning can be very, very complex for a product and for hiring a person. And if you take that same philosophy across all other businesses in the organization, whether it's quality, finance, right? They're all processing information and making changes. And so having that global understanding within our organization that, hey, this is how we deal with change, right? And we happen to think that at IpX, we've got a pretty good model called CM2, right? And so utilizing that process methodology, right, allows us to make the right decisions at the right time and ensure the right implementation for success, right? And that's really what we're trying to accomplish. If I was only going to build, and I used to have the discussion with engineers in the day, right? And they say, well, why do I have to follow go through your change process and all this? Because it slows me down, right? And so we don't want to slow anybody down. A good change process accommodates change. But they would say, what if I'm only building one of these things, right? Yeah, if I'm only building one and then I'm shutting my doors, do I need all the documentation and processes? I could probably squeeze by with some smart people. But the minute I start building 2 or 3 and start doing changes to those and improving my product and multiple products and growth and more sales, things can get very, very complex. And so having this core that we call integrated process excellence and understanding that all the processes are linked together, right? I can't hire somebody because I have a good change management process in CM, just like engineering can't build a product because they don't have the tools to build and everything else, right? So everybody's connected. And so that's one of the things we try to emphasize within IpX is that it's all about interfacing all of these business units together, understanding that we have a common language when it comes to a lot of things that we do, including our ability to release changes, to manage changes, right? There's a commonality there. So let's get everybody into understanding what that commonality really is and get the training for the people, get the linkages for the people, and it becomes very powerful.
So really what I think I hear you saying, in other words, is what change management really is its requirements flow down or flow across to all the functions or domains in the organization for all of the work to be done.
Yep. Correct. Yeah. And it sounds simple, right? It sounds simple, but as you know, that simple statement can be very, very complex, right? Because as my requirements are flowing downwards, right, from a customer, whether it's a contract, right, as they're flowing downwards, if I don't have the right processes in place to be able to make sure that I'm not only going downwards, but sideways into the rest of the organization, what happens? We build a product, but we can't service it, right? Because we didn't take that into consideration up front, or we can build it, but we're not going to make any money on it. Well, that would be pretty silly as an organization to do that, but yet it happens, right? And that's because we don't take the time to understand that it really is, change management is enterprise-wide. It has to be, right? And that's why in the CM2 model, even when we're looking at doing a change, we have what's called an enterprise change assessment, an ECA. And that the purpose of that is to take very early on, let's take a quick look at what the impact of this change could be across the organization. Because just because I'm changing a part, right, that part change might require new tooling in my factories. That new tooling might require training, right? And so you start to begin to see how, wait, the training. Now, how do I track who's trained on that? Well, if I have an HR system and I've got people in here with an employee identification number, I can start linking employees and say, yes, this employee was trained on all these processes. Therefore, they're certified to work on my product in these areas. They're certified to implement these changes, right? And so that's how it just fits into that one area. And so that enterprise perspective and our ability to do change assessment across the enterprise is critical. Because if I can build it for $100, but it's going to take me $200 to service it, probably want to know that up front before I sell it for $150. Right?
Yeah. Once you understand that enterprise change assessment, you understand how complicated a simple change may really be. And I think, we all have these finite amount of resources, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right things at the right time and not utilizing our resources for things that aren't worth it. So we're making sure we're making smart choices and using them for the biggest bang for our buck.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, particularly probably over the last 5 or 10 years, we've been even putting more emphasis on in CM2, right? Give ourselves the best chance at understanding what the change is and the complexity of the change and the cost of that change is up front during the change assessment, okay? Because if we do a good job there, then the actual implementation of that change becomes a lot easier because we understand, we've already identified what those actions are going to be. Now, having said that, I need to stop for a second because usually at this point in the conversation, there's engineers who are working in development who are going like, whoa, man, if I just do what he just said, I'm never going to get my product out of development, right? And so I do need to just make the comment, Brandy, as you know, that in the development process, a fully funded cross-functional development team, CM2 methodology supports a very, very fast and efficient change process for managing that data. And people will often ask, well, why do I even need change management on my data in first few gates of NPI, new product introduction, right? And the answer is because, I'm just joking there, but the answer is the data that we create, and whether it's a 3-month development effort, we have customers who have 5-6 year development efforts and stuff like that. We should be capturing the iterations of my development efforts in my corporate system, not on somebody's hard drive, right? But in my corporate system, and that's my PLM. If I have a PLM system, right? And so being able to capture iterations, and if I can do that efficiently there's always some impact, but with such a minimum impact to the development team, I gain that knowledge, right? And I start understanding what helped me create the beginnings of my digital thread when my product finally starts going further on in the development process and stuff. And so, yes, we want change management in my development, but that change management is very, very extremely efficient, right? Because the people who need to make those decisions are on that team. So I do have to say that because I got to tell you, there's so many times when we're talking configuration and change management, and you get to a certain point and you can just see all the development guys are trying to back out and run out of the room, right? So
that's right. Yes, that's very common. I think it's important to make sure that you're adding the right rigor at the right place, and you want to maintain a light and lean process early on. And as you need to, and as your process and your product requires that additional rigor, that's when you need to introduce it. But yes, I think that's really important. I agree with you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a next question here, and I'm thinking about, coming back a little bit to everyone being engaged in CM. And, sometimes I think about it in this way: is we often hear that quality is everyone's responsibility, right? Like that's a common one. Like we hear that a lot. And that quality is not simply quality's job to either check in or inspect in or make sure that happens. So I think everyone's responsibility is quality. So to me, it sounds very similar that change management is also one of those disciplines per se that it really is everyone's responsibility also. Would you agree that that's a similar analogy?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, just some of the examples we've kind of been talking about already, right? If I'm not trained to have an understanding that, hey, we have a change management process in our company, and yes, depending on where you work, the tools you use for that, or even some of the workflows may be different, but the principles are the same, that we have to go through an analysis, we have to go through a business case, we have to go through an implementation plan. If everybody doesn't understand that, and I'm working, let's say, in some organization somewhere, not directly tied to CM, right? And I make a change on something, right? Not that we've ever seen any of these stories in the news. I make a change to some script that's running in the background for to load some cleaning data cartridges into my library unit and stuff like that. So if I do that and I run it and I go, because I'm just in the maintenance part here, I support the data center. And then all of a sudden, my entire system goes down and people can't make flight reservations, or they can't get their money out of a bank for 8 or 10 hours because we crashed the system. But I didn't do anything intentionally, right? I thought I was just doing the right thing because I had somebody call and say, hey, they were trying to get these cartridges loaded or whatever, or these discs spun up. But it happened because I didn't follow a change process, right? I didn't say, well, what is the request I'm getting? What's the potential of that? Making sure I go through the analysis of it technically, the business case. Yeah, maybe to get business case. Oh, yep, let's go get that fixed and everything else. But then the implementation plan, that what it should say in that particular case, did I test it out? 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 Did I really test it out before I went and just submitted this thing because it happens to be just some background script that runs somewhere? No, I didn't do that. Oh, I didn't follow the change process, right? And so whether we call it officially the change process, everybody, whenever they're going to be making some kind of an update or something, right, is a change request, right? It's a change management process, right? And I like to tell, when we have our training classes and when we're working with our customers, I always tell them that, everybody in the organization, everybody is either creating, making changes to, or using data. So it doesn't matter. Finance, I'm using data, I'm creating data, right? You pick the organization and they're all working with data, they're all making changes to it, right? And so shouldn't we have a common language for doing that, right? And that's really kind of what we're talking about. And the answer is absolutely, right? People need to understand what I do. I may think, oh, I'm just doing this little thing here, but it can have dramatic impact because we don't understand the full change assessment, right? Could something happen in finance that they make a change to something and all of a sudden it causes problems? Absolutely. I worked for a company years ago where they changed health plans, right? We changed health plans. We were supposed to get cards January 1st and something happened in the back systems or whatever. Things didn't get through. And all of a sudden, the first week of January, we just got emails that said, hey, print this email out. And it's got a 1-800 number. And so when you go to your doctor, just have them call us, right? Because the cards weren't going to be out for 3 months. Well, something happened in the implementation of that change somewhere, right? Maybe it wasn't planned properly, right? And that's what we're just trying to say, that the proper planning of any change, whether hiring a new employee, bringing in new tooling, developing a new product, changing a product, right? All of those require a change process, right? And the trick, of course, as you know, is ensuring that my change process accommodates change. That's what the CM2 model is about.
Yeah, very good. I think, like you said, it's all about the data, right? And, you can automate your processes, but that, automation alone doesn't ensure good quality data. So that's what change management's about. And, I think ensuring that quality and consistency and accuracy in your processes really, in turn, helps you enable a quality product. So if everyone would take some of that, as much focus on repeatability and accuracy of their upstairs processes as they do their manufacturing processes downstairs, we'd be in a better place. I think efficiency and first time yield is so important on the floor, but it's also really important to treat our upstairs processes in the same way.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you know, in our training, we actually incorporate a lot of the principles that, like just in time, all the statistical process control things that they utilize in manufacturing. Yeah, we need to use similar things like that over on our side, up above, right? In those other non-product related processes and stuff like that. And even in this change process itself, right? We have to understand capacity planning, priority control, right? So a lot of the functions that we normally think of as manufacturing, those same principles apply across the board. And that's, so it's similar, right? You stated quality is everybody's job, right? Well, change management is everybody's job, and everybody needs to just understand that. And it's not that, it doesn't mean that I'm going to have to sit down and spend all this time working on it, filling out all these forms in some PLM tool. But what it does mean is that I understand the steps of the process and what my role is in that process. And when I say I have to, really what is it is my processes that tell me what my job is should be telling me that. And that's why we talk about that integrated process excellence. Within every process, it should be a pointer that says, hey, when it comes to releasing information or changing that information, this is the process that we follow within our company. So.
Yeah, very good. I like it. So let's get wild and crazy here just for a minute. And I think the listeners, throughout the discussion so far, really understand now that CM belongs to everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like engineering, manufacturing, quality, supply chain, that entire development value stream. Everything that they all do really can be seen as change management. But I think you mentioned it earlier. Could it apply to more ancillary functions like marketing or HR, like you had mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So if you think about that, even from marketing and sales, right? If how many, probably some people that are going to be listening to this podcast are going to recognize the fact that, our salespeople sell stuff that we haven't even figured out how to build yet. And so understanding that our ability to manage requirements, right, which is change management, our ability to understand that, hey, marketing or sales, when you guys are creating this literature, or hey, how about sales when you're working with the people down in the factory and stuff like that to determine capacity and everything else, should that be under some kind of change control? Should you be able to just go out and say, hey, I know what our current product is. I'm going to just go ahead and tell the customer they're going to get something twice as fast, twice as cheaper, and twice as good the next time, and by December, right? So the answer is no, of course not. So they need to understand that when I'm making changes to my requirements at the sales side or the marketing side, it has an impact, and it draws information from the product side, from the quality side, from the manufacturing side. So linking all those together is critical, right? And we've talked HR previously, right? So how hiring a new employee is a change request. Well, that example I just gave earlier, bringing in a new system to manage all of our health insurance and everything else, that's a change request, right? And I gave you the example of, after I worked at a company, we didn't get our health cards. That was probably just one little line item in all the things that had to be done, but apparently it wasn't planned right, didn't have the right focus on it. And so from a change management perspective, right, if I assign tasks have due dates. And that should be done during what we call the change implementation board, right? We have these due dates. If the due date for getting a new health card was the 1st of December, and I'm coming up to that date, I should get a flag that says open task, right? And we need to go back and do some replanning to try to make that happen, right? I will tell you, there were a lot of unhappy people when they didn't have their health cards.
My God.
So understanding that it is those departments that you normally might not even think of, right? Think of shipping, right? Finished goods area and stuff like that. Well, they're just shipping stuff. Well, yeah, but they're shipping stuff, but things can change there. They have to understand that, hey, do I ship my product First in, first out, probably need to do that, right? Especially if we have serialized product and stuff. Are we tracking, right, with barcodes? And so there's a lot of processes involved there. And yes, those processes can have an impact on what's going on in a change request up in engineering. Because one of the things we need to look at from an enterprise perspective, how many units do we have sitting in finished goods getting ready to ship that we might have to pull back for rework? Is it 0? Is it 10? Is it 10,000? Right? And so just understanding that it's that concept of across the enterprise, all from creating my product to purchasing my parts for my product, to selling it, to marketing it, and all the internal support organizations from HR to quality, all the core business processes. It's all linked together.
Yeah, everything is connected or linked in some way. It's all part of some sort of a development life cycle. And I think even employees, they have a development life cycle too, right? They have their onboarding, their training, their experience, their promotions, and, even decommissioning through natural attrition, right? So everyone is, I think that's a lot of times when employees do leave is because there's something missing that the company has not taken care of in their development cycle.
Right. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Having the change control on employee records and employee training plans, and do we have training plans? If not, attrition, especially these days, you got to make sure you've given the people need the right tools to be able to do their job. We agree on that. But people need the right processes to know how to use the tools and how to get their work done. Right. That's more important than the actual tool to a degree, right? Because my processes could be driving my tool selection, what my tool needs to be for me to support me. And if that's not clear and my processes are subject to interpretation or they don't even exist, what's going to happen? I am going to get frustrated. I mean, we work with companies every day, and we hear stories about somebody started working for us and a week later they left because they said, well, they didn't know what to do. Nobody could tell me. And I'm just sitting here frustrated. And I had this other offer. So I went back to them and they're giving me a job. And it sounds like they got some processes together. Right. So having those clear processes in place that tell me how I'm supposed to do my job linked to my tool and making sure that they're clear, concise, and valid. Oh, wait a minute. Nobody wants to work on that. That's all the hard stuff. But yet, if we back up a second and take that enterprise perspective, well, it doesn't mean me, if I'm working in configuration management, are going to be managing the ones for HR, but every department should have their processes documented, should be hopefully working together to get consistency in how we do things. Yeah. And so change management at that point becomes kind of the glue that holds all of that together.
Yeah, agreed. So from your experience and your perspective, what function or domain seems to suffer the most from not being as integrated intentionally into the process as we would like?
Yeah. And opinions change over time because it's funny. Because years ago, I would have told you, the people who suffer the most from it are engineering. I said, no, it's not engineers. It's the manufacturing people, right? And then after, while way longer, I met some service people, and I was like, oh my goodness. The service people, hey, do you guys know we're supposed to be talking to service when you guys are making these changes? And they're like, oh, yeah, but, this one doesn't impact them, right? It doesn't impact them. What we have seen over the years, and especially over the last 10 years, you ship a product once, but it could be maintained out there. Yes, some products we throw away when we're done with them, but a lot of products are going to have to be maintained for a period of time, whether that's a year, 2 years, 5 years, 20, 30 years, like some of our customers' products are out there and stuff like that. So think about that. If I have to support my product from a service perspective for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, shouldn't I be kind of working into that up front in my requirements, but then also when changes are happening, right? Does this change impact service? Who's going to know that? Nobody over here. It's going to be service people. So should they be involved as part of the change assessment up front? Absolutely. Yep, you're right. Yep, I'm looking at this request for change. It's not going to have an impact to us. Oh, that one will. So we're involved in the change process now, right? And even the cost of implementing a change can be a lot more expensive in the field than it is into our factory. But yeah, too often, my opinion is that the service organization is often the one that's overlooked, right? And when I say overlooked, not just from the discussion we just had, but also from the perspective of all the data sets that need to be created to support them. Think back of anybody who's been in industry for a period of time when, hey, this manual needs to be completed so it can be available to be downloaded right away. And we don't have time for that. We'll catch up to that later, right? So a lot of times that customer necessary data or the service data that needs to be there is often delayed, right? And that's just one example, right? And so the service organization, I would say, out of all of them, not only has been the most underserved in when it comes to change management, but also probably the most expensive for not being served properly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of organizations get stuck in the trap of let's focus on new product development. Let's get this into production. And, as soon as they're in production, it's the next hot thing that comes along. So they never get to, everyone always knows we need to get back to what that serviceability looks like. Sometimes we don't take the time to do it. So just due to priorities, I understand.
Yeah. Or we have to go back and do it because all of a sudden we're getting ready to lose a customer account or potentially have a recall on our hands. Then it becomes a priority. And so what we're trying to ensure is that should never happen if we just do the right job as part of this assessment, as part of the change management process. So the service organization has to be involved, integral.
Yeah, proactive work is always better than reactive work. So understood.
I'm beginning to learn that even in my personal life.
So, I guess for one last question for you, Ray, and I think, this has been a really great discussion. And I think, like I said early on, a lot of organizations are still pretty siloed in their view of change management. They just don't see it quite the same as other functions, like engineering or quality. So, a lot of our listeners are probably just individuals in the organization. Mm-hmm. And so from an individual, one person span of influence, do you have any recommendations on how individuals can start to change the culture of their organizations on this from just their own perspective?
Yeah. And I'll start off by saying it's not going to be easy. Right. It's not easy because when historically the particular role has been considered to be a service type of role. And yes, of course, everybody is in the service role in my company. But to be able to demonstrate that it's integral, that it's actually a core competency. Right. And it's not only, and we're going to talk about how I can start doing that if I'm an individual, but you also need to recognize that as far as a role and as a career, where CM has come over the last 10 years is unbelievable. And part of that is being driven because of this whole concept of the digital thread and digital twin, model-based, right? All of a sudden, the role of configuration management personnel has become much more integral and important because they're at the center of all that, right? And if that transfer of data isn't done properly, if the right data isn't done properly, transferred properly, all of a sudden we break that thread. All of a sudden we have all these issues that pop up. So the role has become much more important. So if I'm an individual and I'm sitting in the company and they hired me and they said, yeah, we need somebody to be able to process our changes, right? And so that's what I've kind of been doing for a few months. And I maybe run across some training, right? And say, hey, I want to take this training. And say, all right, just hurry up, do it in your own time because we got to get these documents through, right? So one of the things you can start doing is just looking around. And it's kind of a, look around at what? Well, start looking around and start seeing, so, hey, because we didn't do this well, all of a sudden over here, this thing popped up and became a problem. Can I look at that and say, well, that was because we didn't have a process in place, because we didn't have good change management in place or requirements management, right? All those elements, or people are working outside of the change process. You start gathering some data, right? A little bit of data just to say what's going on that isn't quite right, right? And then we step back and maybe after you've gotten some training or you've past experience, right? Because maybe you came from a another organization that did things really well, then you can start looking at it and saying, so how can I now make this little change to make things a little bit better, right? Because nobody's going to stop you from making things better. So if I can go say, hey, if we just did this, this would stop this one situation from occurring, right? And nobody's going to say, oh, don't do that, right? But now I've just added value to the process, right? And so, and it's going to take time, but ultimately what I want to try to do is start sharing information. Hey, do you know that in my last job, I kind of did this, or I read some book, or I went through this training. And one of the things they said that is there's this thing called corrective action, and it can be really high in a lot of organizations. And they actually give you some ideas on what we can do as a company to actually cut some of that. And guess what? If you're in most companies and you're the only person, I'm going to have a good guess that it's either a growth companies just starting off, or it's a company that never recognized this integrated process excellence stuff before. They probably have corrective action going on. And so being able to just say that word, right? Being able to say, and by the way, I think because we're not planning changes properly, manufacturing, I heard, is scrapping a lot of material. Shouldn't we take a look at that, right? And so sometimes it's just planting a seed and letting it grow, right? I've been doing this for many years. I've worked with individuals who started as one person. And then all of a sudden, 6-7 years later, saying, yeah, I have 4 people working for me. I'm a manager now. And we're actually implementing some really good changes. And engineering still struggles with us sometimes, but they know we're really there to try to help them, right? And so we've seen that kind of growth. And there's other companies that just want to stay small. They don't get it. They're still going to treat it the way it is. And my advice in that case is go look for somebody who's going to appreciate you, because they're out there as well.
Yeah, very well. Very good. I think from an individual standpoint, and I think, just everybody, we have this catchphrase, digital thread. Everybody has a digital thread, mm-hmm. Even if it's Excel spreadsheets, right? This is your digital thread. And mm-hmm. from your siloed perspective, just like, I think what you're saying is just open your eyes and open the awareness, that you're going to receive work from this side and you're going to do something with it. You're going to add to it. You're going to change it in some way. And then you're going to pass it on down to the next person down the line. And, that's quality of work, right? And so just being aware of, the upstream work and the downstream work and opening up those silos and communication about how really we're all a team and we're all in this together. And I think that's really what's important, is that we understand from a big picture and there's issues or you see opportunities, just voice those, just share those, open up and talk about how you can improve things and how that would increase the fidelity of that data as you pass it through.
Mm-hmm. Clear, concise, and valid, I guess, not only in our data, but also in our communications with folks, right? Telling them, this is what I've seen. I need your help. Right? Let's talk. Let's go talk to that other organization that seems to be struggling with it, or we're struggling with getting good data from them and stuff like that. Yeah, communication is always the key. It's so interesting in today's world that it still comes down to communication, right? And whether I'm going in the office, whether I'm working from somewhere else, okay, it's still being able to have that communication in place, which means also having clear processes in place, so I could actually tell people, well, hey, here's what I'm supposed to be doing and how I do my job. Let's see how that interfaces with the issue that we're having here. And a lot of times what we find is that how we do our job and our processes aren't necessarily matched up one for one. And so the difficulty comes is when we do grow as a company and somebody else comes in, how's that person trained, right? If I don't have clear processes in place, now if I was the only person, I hired somebody, well, I don't want to spend 3 months or 6 months getting them 100% up to speed on everything, because who's going to do my job, right? And so having clear processes in place is a good foundation that says, hey, here you go. Here's how we do this. Here's all the links. Here's the links to the tools and everything else. So absolutely.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you, Ray, so much for this discussion. I guess, the only thing I'd like to close out here is if anyone has any questions. We've covered a lot of really great topics and information today. How can people reach out and to you maybe directly and find out more, or how they can get some help?
Absolutely. If you want to drop me an email, I'm usually pretty good about within a day answering most emails. It's ray@ipxhq.com. And we're more than glad to take any emails, any questions about any other topics we talked about today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ray. And same thing with me. It's Brandy@ipxhq.com. And we'd love to hear from anyone if anyone has any questions or anything to add with our conversation today.
Thank you for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe and review the show. And for more information on IPX, visit ipxhq.com.